Hello, everyone. Welcome to our December webinar for the Aspen Family Business Group. We're really happy to have you join us today. As everyone files in from the waiting room to the webinar, we'll go over a couple of housekeeping details. I wanted to let everyone know that this is being recorded. We save all the content and we've been posting now. We're up to date, I'm pretty sure, on our website, posting our past webinar recordings, and they're also available on our YouTube channel. We will be using the Q&A feature for this webinar. We encourage you to be active in that. There's no chat feature on the webinar, but Jonathan and Leslie will be asking questions of you, and we also encourage you to ask any questions that you have that come to mind. You have the option to remain anonymous on the Q&A if you so choose. And today we have Leslie Dashew, our board chair and one of the original founding members of the old Aspen Family Business Group back before we were a nonprofit, and Jonathan Magitovich, one of our board members. And I'm going to turn it over to them. Thank you both.
Thank you, Shelley. So during this webinar, we're going to be exploring considerations for repositioning ourselves and our businesses for the coming year and well into the future. With this topic, and with the timing of it, we're playing with the old ritual of making those lists of New Year's resolutions. And I used to do it. I'm sure we all did. And I'm sure, like many of us, mine were never done. Our goal today is to come at this again in very different ways, structure, creating pathways for success in change as we reposition ourselves for the coming year. Leslie?
Yes, and one of the things you might want to think about and write in the Q&A spot would be challenges or opportunities that you're thinking about addressing in the coming year. Frequently, our changes come because something needs to change, and we feel discomfort or uncomfortable about what's happening, and see something we need to do differently. Mention that because it could be an opportunity or it could be a challenge. Mention that when you have an opportunity in the chat. And as we think about these opportunities, part of what helps us to get past the notion of New Year's resolutions is really having a plan. And there are several concepts that we really want you to think about in planning for next year. There's a saying from Lewis Carroll, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So a lot of times we just kind of react and keep going and don't have a plan. And so we can end up anywhere, which sometimes in our lives is okay. But in other times we really want to be more proactive rather than reactive. And we have a destination we're interested in getting to. And with that, we can use our resources more effectively. But sometimes people worry about the being too planful and inflexible. But a plan is a null hypothesis, if you will. It's a direction and it's a strategy and maybe some steps that can be changed as circumstances require it. So things happen, bumps in the road happen, and we need to be flexible in order to adjust our plans in order to get there. So it's important to think about the fact that if you develop a plan, it doesn't mean that you have to rigidly follow it. Another concept that I think is really important is whether or not you feel empowered to develop a plan for yourself. And what we've noticed is in research that's been done on people who are effective in their lives and have made a difference is there's some people grow up with an internal locus of control and some people have an external locus of control. If you have an internal locus of control, it means you think that you can have an impact on the world around you. If you grow up with an external locus of control, you feel like the world is impacting you and you don't have that kind of power to make a difference. And so it's important to be mindful that you might have an orientation to feeling like I just go along and react and don't have the ability to make a difference and set my own goals. And folks who are more proactive tend to have that internal locus of control. And finally, the last point we want you to think about as we're moving forward here is the notion of neuroplasticity. Our brains are plastic and they change. And as what we found about planning is the more we make a plan, the more we create these pathways, neural pathways in our brain, and the more likely we are to make things happen. We'll talk more about that. And so having a plan actually helps us to be effective in having plans come to pass and actually be actualized. Jonathan, what are some thoughts you have?
Well, with you, I'll share that I was student of this professor, and Ellen decided whether she was going to be acting out of internal or external locus of control. And she said she was definitely an internal, I'm running my own life person. But she said one of her favorite sets of times was when somebody else was the professor and she didn't have to worry if the slide projector was working. Just let, and that can be an enjoyable difference. Although I think I and Leslie, I know about you, we're trying to be managers of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I agree, I just came back from, as you know, from a trip from India, and it was the first time that I've been on a trip like that where I haven't made a plan. My cousin, who spent many, many years over there, developed the plan and organized it for us, and I just showed up on my airplane there. And I tell you what, it was really fun to not have the responsibility once in a while for organizing all that.
It's a delicious moment.
Yes. So when we think about moving forward with planning, there are three different dimensions that we want to bring your attention to. We think about the family business, your individual goals, and interpersonally. So in a family business, one of the things that we find is that some people, depending on your role or roles, you might be more reactive versus proactive. As many of you know, I started a program 30 years ago for women in family business because many of them were reactive and didn't feel like they had a seat at the table. And it's really important that all stakeholders in family business feel the right to be proactive rather than just reactive, although there are times when it's appropriate for us to be reactive. A part of that process is to learn to set boundaries and priorities. And so you really want to be clear about what it is you want for this family business and what is your role in it and what are the boundaries that you have about how you'll be involved and how you'll not. And what are the priorities, because there's so many things that can happen. So it's really important that we create a shared vision, which is part of the planning process for the family business, so that we all know what it is we want and that our voices, we're clear about what we want and what our roles are, and that we are part of setting that picture, that target, that vision. And one of my observations is that when we have a shared vision, it's one of the most critical success factors to family business because all of us feel like we've been heard. Secondly, in order to be effective as a member of that family business team, we have to come to terms with the notion that we matter, that our voice matters, and we have that internal locus of control, and we can think about how we want to be involved and what we want to accomplish with our life when, and why it is that it's important for us to be involved in the family business and what it is we want to do. And it isn't just luck or fate or other people who will determine our destiny. We have to take responsibility for that. And so in our lives, as we set goals, it's sometimes more complex in a family business because we're thinking about the context of the family and the business, which is much more impactful in family-owned businesses than it is in families that don't have businesses. We don't have the same context and set of drivers that we do in a family business. So it becomes really important for us to be really clear about what we want in our lives and how that fits in with the family business. And finally, we need to think about how we engage others interpersonally and negotiate for what matters to you. So when we think about our family in the business and out of the business, how do we get into dialogue and really consider what other people want, what we want, and how do we negotiate an agreement on how the family business helps us, how we help the family business, how others can support us, how we can support others, and make our dreams come true. I once had a client who would come to our annual family business women's program, and we do exercises on articulating our dreams and goals. And she would say to me, Leslie, I can't dream. And so finally, one year, she stated her dream and she was so excited. She wanted to go to the Basque country where her family ancestors were and hike there. And so she created that dream. She wrote it down. She developed a plan. And by gosh, she did it. She went and she was so excited about having accomplished that. And that really taught her that individually, she matters. She can be proactive. She can make it happen. And then she negotiated with her family to make sure that her responsibilities were covered and that she could go do that. So it's always exciting when you see that kind of thing happen and you realize, yes, I matter and my dreams and goals count.
The way that we matter. We're asking ourselves, do I matter and how and where? We can matter in the family business as a whole, but we don't have to matter in every aspect of the business in the same way to matter to the family business. And that goes back to knowing who we are, what our strengths are, where we want to be, and where we want to glow and shine.
So I think one of the things that we think is important is what are the tools that really help us to make these dreams and goals reality. And so we believe that starting with yourself and what your purpose is and then moving on to setting goals and being clear about our values and our vision are all part of that process. So Jonathan, do you want to speak to that?
Let's throw up the slide there on personal statement of purpose, just a few words about that, and have our attendees take a second to read this to yourselves. In this exercise, this personal statement of purpose, you'll take the perspective of four people from different aspects of your life: family, friend, colleague, and community. And then go through a series of guided questions like think about things that have happened in the last few years of your life and what they might have gotten out of it. What is something that you taught them or helped them to understand better? Or how did you inspire them? What would they say about that? And write these things down and go through them, and then when you've got that list, take a look at it, but come back again. And if you did it first, considering maybe what a family member would have thought of you, think then of what a colleague might have thought of you in your interactions with them over the last few years. It could be a very different read. And then when you pull that all together, sort of think through that, you've created a series of written pieces of information that show what it is that you are about to that person in your mind. Take that, distill it down to a single sentence. That is very likely to be your personal statement of purpose. And when you have a purpose, you have direction. And when you have direction in a world that is so filled with possibility, it gives you a very shorthand way of saying, that's not to my purpose. And I'm not going to put my resources, my energy there. And if I have a clarity about purpose and I bump into something that's a match, I dive in. Very valuable, focusing, energizing tool. And we've got the next tool.
Before we go to that,
Yes,
Jonathan, maybe we can share our purpose statements.
we could do that.
One of the things that's interesting is statements of purpose tend to be pretty stable. We don't change that much over life while our vision changes for the times. And a few years ago, adjusted mine. Mine was always around helping people grow and become the most effective people they can. And not too long ago, I realized that really what I found is I'm a convener. And so I changed mine to say, my purpose is to bring people together to learn, grow, heal, and assist each other on our journeys. So even if I'm in a volunteer role or I'm in a social role, it seems that convening people is really what my purpose is about.
So when I do this exercise, I did it last a few months ago. For me, it came down to bringing to reality the values, mission, and vision of myself and others. I love asking people questions, social settings or wherever. And it feels like a great way to understand what matters to them. Nice conversation. And again, clarity. Clarity in where I'm going to focus.
Okay, excellent.
Gonna
So
know.
there is a question in the chat. It says, I don't have access to put a question in the Q&A. Can we have goals for family business without having goals for ourselves? You did a great job of putting it in there. Well, you can. You can have a goal for the family business. You can say, my goal is to have the company be profitable and reach a certain kind of return this year and to make sure we have a stable workforce and that our employees feel well compensated. So you can have that and not have goals for yourself. But in determining your goals for the business, it's helpful that if the business is your business, if you're an owner or working there, if you're not clear what your goals are, then it's going to be hard to participate in the activities of goal setting for your business and have it be responsive to what you need. So it's a good idea to have them.
When I first heard that question read out, I reacted to it as if yes, it's possible, but what seems likely is if you don't have goals for yourself, but you do have goals for the business, I would look back inward and see if indeed there are goals that maybe are aligning or you would hope are being aligned with by the business, but that you weren't yet clear about. To me, that question is a call to look inward.
And Stephanie raised the question about how do we measure not just financial returns, but relational, spiritual, and legacy returns. And I think, Stephanie, that's a really good question. It gets us back to what's important to us. And if as an individual, my purpose is to positively impact other people and have some spiritual aspect of that, for example, then once you're clear about that, then you can talk with other owners and family members and say, how do we make sure that happens? So one of my clients several years ago believed that their business success was a function of their commitment to their church. And so before they took any profits to share with the family, the second two owners, the second generation, made a commitment to 10% of the returns going to their church. And then they would look at profits that are retained and then profits that come to owners. And so as they got older, and sadly both have passed now, they made sure that that was documented because that was really important to them. That was part of their purpose, was to honor God. And so by it being clear to them and they had agreement on that, then they were able to put that in to the business as well. So it can be spiritual, it can be goals for relationships, and it can be for what you want in the terms of the legacy as well. Starting with
Yes,
yourself, though, is important. Should we go to the next tool?
we should.
Okay. Values unfolding.
Mhm.
So when the Aspen Family Business Group was started about 40 years ago, we met with David Bork was really the leader of that process, and he had met Ann Dapis. And Ann has a doctorate in values. It's the one and only person I've ever met who had that. And she created this exercise, a values unfolding instrument. And it's a way to really get at what your core values are. And this is really important because our purpose tells us what we want to accomplish. Our values tell us how we want to do that and what's most important to us. And a lot of times we will say something to the effect of, oh, I want to be kind to other people, or it's important for me to have financial security. The things that are rather conventional and common among people, we don't dig deep. And so her exercise gives us an opportunity to dig deep. And I think we'll have that in either the attachments or sent to you after the program. But you start with listing 12 values, that which is important to you. So you just list 12 of them, and then you put them in order of priority. Which value would be most important and then second most important. And that's not easy to do. That's very difficult. Once you do that, it was originally a piece of paper that was folded 6 times. Then you take each value and say, why is that important? And you try to answer it 6 times. So if philanthropy is important, why? Well, it's important because we need to care for others. So caring for others is important. Why is that? We're all interdependent. We all need to we all depend on each other. Why is that important? And so then you keep answering that. Then you go to the next value and you do the same thing up to 6 or 7 times. And then after you've done that for all 12, you look through this piece of paper with all of these words and you look for patterns. What keeps coming up over and over again? And so, for example, out of a piece like that, one of the values might be shared responsibility or helping others. And that might be a theme that comes up as really one of your unfolded values. The first 12 are our public values. Those are the things we tell other people. But as we unfold it, we really get to what are our core values. And then you look at those and you can create a statement of that which is most important to you and use that to guide you. As Jonathan said, when we have our clarity of vision and values, it really helps us make decisions. So if I'm going to make a budget for my life and spend money on that which is important to me, and philanthropy is important, then I would set aside a certain amount of money, or I might tithe and say, I'm going to spend 10% of what I earn in charity and helping others because that is a value of mine. Or if art and artistic stuff is important, then I might spend my time and vacation time on doing things that have to do with art and aesthetic aspects of my world. So that's one of the exercises that helps. One of our colleagues, Dennis Jaffe, had a set of cards that he used, and you could go through the cards and draw out name words that connected to you as well. So there are many different ways to identify these.
So Leslie, yeah, there are so many values exercises out there. You'll go online and you'll find many. But going back to this one that Leslie has just spoken about, I'm going to share something that happened probably within the last month with a co-facilitator on this exercise, who before the exercise was done with the group just said, it has way too many. We don't need to find 12. And I said, fine, but it is a long list. And it takes a while with this exercise. In fact, so many of these sort of dive inside exercises to get into the exercise, to get into the zone of it. And if you try to run through this quickly, you might not get into the zone, but by the time you're pushing yourself to stay with this and to explore and then do the 12 values and then come at them so many cycles of repetition, you probably are going to find that you've gotten into it. Results are going to be maybe a cleaner or a truer look at what's going on in your values.
Yeah.
And by the way, I tend to think of our values as pretty stable. They
Yeah.
could change a little bit, but it's almost like a fingerprint that the world sees how we move in the world through our values. And maybe often they tell us, and that becomes very important. Doing values, understanding our values helps us understand ourselves in much the way other people might see us.
Yes. And you know, what's interesting is another way of saying what you value is look how you spend your time. Our time is our most important resource. And if you spend your time watching TV, but you say, oh, I like to read, and you don't read a book, then it tells you enjoying television and let's say sports, for example, is important to you. And it's okay to put that up there for those people who value that. That's just being honest about who you are and honoring it. The other thing, by the way, is I agree with you that our values tend to be fairly stable. Some of our values come from that which we didn't have. So if growing up we didn't have financial security, then many times financial security becomes a value for us. It's what we call a deprivation value. And what's interesting is once we accomplish that, assuming we do, once we're financially secure, you're no longer worried about that, and that may not be as high a value anymore. It may become having free time. And as we age, sometimes time, which is scarcer, becomes more important than it was when we were young. And so in those ways, energy, another one is energy. I value my energy to be able to do things. And I used to have much more of an abundance of energy. So as that's shrunk, that becomes more of a value. Shelley asked a good question, which is this something you do solo or as a group activity? And it's yes. It's really good to do first by yourself. And then once you get through the exercise, then to share it with other members of your family. And that becomes a really enriching exercise for the family to do, to share that. And then to be able to identify what are the values that are shared, that are most important for us as a family and that we support each other in doing. So that's a really good question.
I would say, again, as a facilitator, I always tell people that they're going to do this. They have control over what they share if they share from this. I think that's really important that you allow people, you allow yourselves to maintain that boundary as well. What's going to be shared and what isn't.
Okay, so let's go on to the third exercise. And again, these are all exercises you can do individually or collectively. So the third one has to do with setting goals and priorities. And this one we didn't have a specific goal on. It's one that I used many years ago and find is a useful one for you individually and then to share with others. And it has 3 steps. The first thing is you write down everything you want to accomplish in your life and maybe spend 10 minutes at most doing that. And again, like other exercises, you can go through this and then refine it. And so you jot down everything without censoring. Don't censor it, just write down whatever comes to your mind or things that you want to do. And then the next sheet of paper, write down everything you want to accomplish in the next 2 to 3 years. And then you start refining that and write down all the things that are important to do in the near future. And then finally, after you spend 10 or 15 minutes doing that, you do the third part, which is if I knew I was going to die within a year and all the logistics were taken care of planning my funeral and so on, but I only had 12 months of time in my life, what would I do with that time? And then write down everything that comes to your mind. And then once you do those 3 lists, compare them. It's so interesting to see if we think we have unlimited amount of time, we focus on things that are very different than if we have 2 to 3 years or if we know we have less than a year. Typically, there's a lot of travel in our lifetime goals and other things that are kind of pie in the sky and big picture. 2 to 3 gets us a little bit more concrete about things that are important in our life and our work and our family. And the 1 year, many people focus on relationships and wanting to spend time with those who are important, although those are just broad generalizations. But then being able to compare all 3 lists really helps you to think when you look at that plus your values plus your purpose, you really begin to think, wow, what is it that I want to spend my resources on? My time, my energy, my money. And what's most important that I do in the short run. One of the things you'll notice is, as those of you who know me, you'll notice that we're doing a lot of traveling, my husband and I and the rest of the family. And part of that's because I feel like I have a finite amount of time where I might have the physical ability, or my husband has the physical ability to do some of the trips we want to do. We would have the time to do things more sedentary in our older years, but doing the things that are more aggressive, like going to India or Africa, are harder to do when you get over 80. And so that's part of this thinking about priority setting with the goals. Jonathan, some thoughts?
I'm actually, my head is on the next exercise already, and I'm feeling that there's conceptually overlap there. Are we ready to go?
Yes.
Let's do that. Creating a shared vision statement is here. And in our literature, the Aspen materials, we call this a letter to ourself. And is this something that comes from the individual? In part, but this one is more weighted to the family or the family business. The goal is that the family as a group through this exercise approaches, develops, writes down, tests, and lives a vision for the future together. So what you do is individually, you write a letter to yourself about where you want to be, where you want the family to be, or where you want the family business to be a few years into the future.
And typically there are 3 components. We say, this is what's happened in the family, this is what's happened in the business, and this is what's happened in my life.
As that's written down, and then you're sharing this and you're putting it on the table, so to speak, and then you collect themes. You said that. I said that. Oh, that's almost, and you're sharing and seeing what is shared. And then from the shared material, the common ground, you draft a vision statement. And then you redraft it. And then you look at that, and each of you ask yourself, do I buy into that? Do I want that vision? Am I willing to put my resources into that vision? And when you get a yes, you have a vision statement that you can share and you can move forward with as a family and as a family business. So here's the thing about vision. And Leslie and I, we've been saying that while values are fairly steady through life and purpose is fairly steady, vision changes. When you achieve a vision, do it again. Come together again, do the process again. So this is a cycle that goes on continually. And you're writing letters to yourself over and over again, but they're always a different letter, but a shared process.
And it's really lovely to one of the things I found is that, sometimes, as I mentioned about one young woman who really didn't think she could vision. A lot of times people don't begin to think about what they want for the future and really get it articulated. And then most often, that's not something we tend to share with our family. And finally, what's interesting is when you can articulate and share your vision for the future of the business and you get alignment with the family on that, then you can solve any problem, in my experience. If we all want the same thing for the family business and the family, then we can address interpersonal problems, we can address business priorities, all because we are going in the same direction. We want the same thing. So that becomes really critical. And let's go back to neuroplasticity for a minute. When we developed that plan, that vision, one of my favorite stories is I had a young man and we did the for 6 or 7 years. And after 5 years or so, we met and we were looking back at their letters to selves. And this young man wrote a very amusing letter to self. And he talked about the fact that he was living in a country called New Tokyo and it was an imaginary world. And that he had a 1 month old baby at that time. And he mentioned his second child had been born in about 3 years out in the letter to self, and he mentioned the date. She was born on August 8th of that year. And when we read the letter 5 years later, I'll be darned if he didn't have a baby within a month of that date. And that wasn't that he just kind of planned that date and worked back 9 months. They had a miscarriage in the meantime. And so I find that there's something magical about making sure you write things down because your brain starts working towards that and you have choices to make. If you've articulated the vision and you've started to work towards it, you really find that your decisions follow that. And that becomes a really important tool.
You know, this reminds me of something that I used to, in car rides, we would sit in the back seat, my brother, sister, and I, and we would, look for a Ford or a Chevrolet. And whatever you're looking for, you suddenly start seeing. When you have vision, you suddenly start seeing the things that were probably already there but didn't stand out to you because your eyes are open to them. So you used the word a minute ago, magical, Leslie.
Yeah.
The magic is that we literally open our eyes in a very decided way and we start seeing things that lead us to our vision, to realizing it.
One of the other stories along those lines is I always had a dream, as many of you know, to have an adobe house. And I had that dream from the time I was a little girl. And once I got to be an adult, I realized I really didn't know how to describe what I wanted. And I started keeping a notebook. And when I would see a picture that looked like either the house or the doorways or fixtures, I would put that in this notebook. And by when Bailey was in a junior year of high school and was getting ready to go to college, I realized, okay, I'm going to move to Arizona and I need to find the land and begin to think about this house. And then found the land and then took this notebook and met with architects. And one of them said, oh, yeah, sure, that's a Pueblo style adobe house. And oh, okay, now I have a name for it. And the different architects I talked to were able to develop a plan for the house I had in my head, but not because I could articulate it myself, but because I had gathered this notebook together and it had all the images that were there. And my house is pretty darn close to that image. So again, that's part of how our brain works towards that. And we accumulate the images, accumulate the resources that are necessary. We find the people who can collaborate with us once we have clarity about that and our brain is aligned towards that.
And when we were talking last week, Leslie, and you mentioned that story about building your physical house, I immediately went to that's how Shauna and I, step by step, my wife and I, um, grew our family. We, got married and that involved a fulfillment of vision and all the steps around that. And then we thought about having children and, not just number of children, but, what life would be like. And then what would we want for our kids, as students and just as you do it, you see that it can realize, and there's always the caution to allow space for the universe to influence things beyond that. Do the visioning, make the dreams. I think, Leslie, you invented Pinterest before it existed. But do that. Collect the pieces that feel like they're part of your puzzle, and then see that puzzle form.
What was one of the funniest stories that I shared as we were talking about this was many, many years ago. I had a client and we were talking about strategic planning for her company. And she said, "Oh, yes, I've done strategic planning for myself too. I wanted to get married. And so I developed a strategic plan for getting married." And she developed real clear criteria for what her future husband would be like and what his background would be, and then what was the way she would find him. And she started identifying the places she would need to go and the connections she would need to make in order to meet someone like him. And she started implementing her plan and action steps. And sure enough, she found her husband pretty close to the time frame she had in mind. So there's somebody who's done one of the things that we've talked about, which is the planning process. That the difference between having a dream and executing it is by having a plan where you really understand the action steps you need to take. And when you document that, it really helps to increase the odds that it will happen.
So I just want to share an anecdote of someone who I know who spends she every year without fail, she takes a week at the beginning of the year and she stays this was even before long before people were working from home. She sits in front of her fireplace, she gathers all her notes from the year and all her binders and all her notebooks and she starts crafting a plan and she gives herself this huge amount of time to do it. It's not an hour, it's not a half a day, it's a week. And she sits there and she goes through all her notes from the whole year and then she starts crafting what she wants the next year to look like. And it covers all aspects of her life. It's her work life, it's her
Mhm.
personal life, it's her volunteer life. And this is a woman who is very successful and gets a lot done. And she
Mhm.
takes the time to not just go through the motions, but to really be thoughtful and plan it as well. And you do have a comment in the Q&A too. I wanted to bring your attention to
I
that
was
as
just
well.
looking at that. I loved it. It's a Chinese proverb that says two-thirds of what we see is behind our eyes. And there are many ways to interpret that, including the fact that we tend to not be able to be as objective as we think we can. And also, once we're clear about what's in our brain behind our eyes, we will identify those things that connect to it as well. So it's wonderful.
This next quarter of the webinar, we're going to be going through some points that are a little bit of a review and a little bit of encouragement to build structure. And when you add structure to what you normally did just without even thinking it, flow of life, it can feel artificial at first. In the same way that, for example, if the first time you're in a gym and you don't know how to use this or that weight machine, it can be difficult until you get into the flow. But use these tools, use them a few times, and they become much more natural, and you enjoy the experience, and it becomes a virtuous cycle upward of success. This slide, sorry I interrupted you, Leslie.
No, that's okay. You know, I was looking back at my vision for the next chapter of my life, and I looked at the date. I was so surprised. It was 2011 that I wrote this, and it sounds pretty much like where I'm at now. To be a financially secure, physically fit, respected elder advisor who is centered at home with my healthy husband, working when I want, taking pictures, writing, publishing books with photos, poems, and wisdom, hanging out in my garden, traveling for fun, visiting my friends and family, supporting causes on an ad hoc basis, both financially and with advice, and having gatherings of friends, colleagues, and clients. And so it's pretty close to where I'm at now. I'll have some refinements for the next chapter. Like next year is about building my muscle strength even more and my flexibility. And those are two important things that I'm developing my action steps for, and the plan for travel to places that we want to enjoy again together, uh, and uh, and working less. So I'm not retiring totally, but I'm working much less and really being available to my existing clients, but not taking on many new clients. So that's kind of adjusting the plan a little bit. And I'm not looking to publish books anymore, just have fun with my photos. So it's an adjustment. We have to adjust as we go forward. Shall we move on to the next slide?
Yes, there's some points that we're going to go through right now. So, one of them is about accountability. Again, a
Mhm.
review. If we don't have a goal, it's very hard to be accountable for meeting the goal or not meeting the goal or anything. So, personal accountability, family, business, family accountability for meeting goals, you have to first set a goal. And
And
then
that's I'm sorry. And I'm thinking about the shared vision and who's accountable for that for a family business. And many times there's somebody who's the chief emotional officer, the other CEO, who's responsible for the family side of the vision. And then the CEO or chairman is responsible for the business side. And a lot of times we have a hard time holding our family accountable for accomplishing the goals. And so one of the accountability pieces that we advise oftentimes is to have a board of directors. And the board of directors can hold the business and the owners accountable in a much more objective way if you have independent directors. And I've seen that so many times now that that's such an important tool. And putting that effort together and the resources together to have that is very important. And then the board is accountable to the owners. And then personal accountability as well. If the other day when I was really tired, if I didn't have a trainer I was going to work out with, I probably wouldn't have gotten up and gone to the gym. But I have that person, and I have somebody I walk with every morning with our dogs, and knowing that they're waiting for me is part of that accountability piece. So I think your point about accountability is very important.
next thing I would want to bring forward is the power of repetition. Now, doing these exercises, it is not natural. This is a decision and it's a thought process, and then we make ourselves do it. And it is not unusual that we then look back after having done it and say, what was that about? These bear doing. The results can take a while to come forward. They noodle around in our head for a while. So sometimes there's an immediate insight during the exercise, and boy, that's wonderful. But sometimes that insight comes through that's circulating inside or inside the family. And it's like when I said, we were in the back seat of the car, we were looking for Fords out the window or cows, and that suddenly we saw Fords or cows or whatever we're looking for. These exercises tend to help us see those things happening in our lives. And repeat them, I would say fairly regularly. We're definitely trying to get beyond New Year's resolutions, but here we are in December talking about 26 in the future and change plans. It is a good idea to set a ritual to this, that we're business or personal planning regimen has to it a sense of timing, of seasonality, of ritual. And every time we do it, I believe that we get more wise in doing it and more effective and more likely that the insights come and that we know how to actualize those insights. So you do the exercise the first time, it's not great, or maybe it is great. I hope it is. But even if it's not a bad exercise. We have to grow with it. We have to bring it along on our path.
And I think that the exercise strengthens our muscles in our brain about that and our insight. Wisdom comes from harvesting from our experience, harvesting knowledge from our experience. And if we don't stop and reflect on our experience, we don't learn. And so if as we reflect through these exercises, we learn about ourselves, we learn about our family business systems, and we're able to move it forward in a more effective manner. But we have to also be mindful of our energy and our resilience and what we're doing to make all these things possible.
Absolutely. So we've talked a couple of times about how we don't want to say, oh, the universe is just going to change anything we planned anyway, so why bother? We don't want to do that. We do want to do this planning. We do want to go through these in a ritual, regular kind of way in our lives, but on a parallel track. Yep. The universe is going to throw us curves. And it is a very good idea that we consciously do things that increase resilience. And those are things like working out or meditation or picking up a new skill. They say learning a second language keeps off the dementia. It does make us stronger. So, doing things that build resilience alongside planning into the future is a really good duel to walk with together.
So we've talked about accountability, resource management is just to reiterate about that. We use our resources more effectively, whether it's time, energy, money, patience, based on our clarity of our where we're going and how we want to get there. So our vision and our mission and our values. And so that helps us to be more purposeful in getting to where we want to go. And again, it narrows the options a little bit for us, so we can be clearer about moving forward. And then as we plan, we can change our goals, we can change our strategies, and it is an iterative process that happens and folds in what realities are happening in the world. And then I think one of the questions you raised, Jonathan, was about capacity. How much can we expect of ourselves or our family business? What are some of
Absolutely.
your thoughts about that?
What I think about, I think about personal capacity and I also think about organizational capacity. And what we're talking about there is there's a reality to how much we can do individually or as a family business and organization. And as we're setting goals, if we are not conscious or in some way measuring the capacity to do these things that we're laying out for our future, we might find ourselves doing an otherwise wonderful process, but swamping the whole thing because we have overplanned as far as quantity. Do we want 30 goals for the next year? Or do we want one or two or three? There's not a right answer to that. It depends on what matches your capacity. This is art because there are some families that might have a tendency to underestimate and others to overestimate their capacity. And what you want to do is get it exactly right, but we're always working on that.
The other thought that I think as we begin to come to a close that I don't think we've really covered is really as much as I think is important is engaging and enlisting support. We need to be sure that we're not thinking about all of this alone when we're in the family business in particular, in general as well. But we need to be sure that we're engaging other people in this. There's an old African proverb. It says, if you want to go fast, do it yourself. If you want to go far, do it with others. And I think that that's really something that oftentimes entrepreneurs have a hard time moving to the engaging others in the planning. They're used to operating on their own. And so it slows them down. They can't accomplish as much when they are having a process of dialogue about these pieces. And so it becomes very important to understand what the priority is. And if the priority is a legacy of a continuity of something beyond oneself, then we have to engage others in that process and help them learn and help them make decisions with us and help them set the clarity of values and vision. And with that, then they're much more likely to continue to implement what it is that's important to me and us. And so that enlisting and engaging support becomes very important.
Absolutely. And obvious place to look for candidates are within your family or within the business or staff, but it can go beyond that as well. These people that you enlist for your support, it's a very precious relationship. Express your gratitude and your respect for the process. It's a very, very powerful tool. So, very quickly, sort of wrap up, kind of looking back, we've talked about having a purpose and it sets a destination for us, and that we want to be clear about our values and we want to think both in short term and long term and what the impact is of various things that we might do and include that in the equation of our planning process. Think we have wrapped much of our list. Is there anything that's still open to you in your thinking, Leslie?
No, I think we've covered the waterfront that we wanted to do in an hour. Are
Well,
there any last questions before we wrap up here
let's
or
see there.
comments? And if not, I think,
Let's wrap up with these post webinar points. Is that okay?
yes, yes.
First of all, we are very grateful for all of our attendees here, and you will be getting resources emailed to you. We also encourage you to look at our website. I think that we're very proud of our website. The tool, it keeps growing, and the resources from tonight you'll find on the website. Yes, there will be a recording. We have a unique tool at Aspen, and you can access it for free on our website, and it is SAM. And SAM is an artificial intelligence small language model which has been trained on all of the Aspen materials for the last 4 or 5 decades. And you put in an answer, and you're not getting a very general chat GPT answer. You're getting an answer about family business that's been trained in Aspen literature. And by the way, that's growing beyond Aspen literature. Lights in the field of family business consulting have begun contributing their materials to SAM. So you're really getting an amazing resource there. The next thing is Coffee with Leslie, a delicious experience, a charming experience. So that's going to be a conversation about your goals for the year ahead. Much the turf that we've been on tonight, but it is in an interchange conversational meeting, for an hour or so online. December 11th, and you see the time zones, Eastern Standard Time, 1 p.m., and please join us for that. Again, thank you all for being with us.
Thank you all. We hope to see you next time. And as we round out the year, start your planning for the next year. You've got lots of tools.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.